Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we'll be discussing Shane Black's new Predator film titled The Predator, and then asking, does it really matter if you haven't seen the previous films? Obviously this referring to The Predator being the newest film in the Predator franchise, which they've sort of done films on and off for about, the last 30 years. But they're trying to pick up some new fans with this film now, by the looks of it. But anyway, before we get into that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, in the last couple of weeks, I've watched most of the first 2 seasons of Glow, the Netflix comedy drama, basically sets around the making of another TV show called Glow, which was produced in the 80s and back then stood for Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. So yeah, this is a ladies wrestling show with the lead 2 women in the wrestling cast, played by Alison Brie and Betty Gilpin, and also starring Mark Maron as their coke-addled director chap. And yeah, it's really good. It's from the same production house, although not technically the exact same showrunner, as Orange is the New Black. It does have a similar sort of comedy-drama mix, except Orange is the New Black always ultimately comes down on the side of drama. This is quite grim, whereas Glow is more of a comedy. It's only half an hour long, and it does tend to go for either the laugh or the, "Aw, they're like a little found family" feeling moments. So yeah, I finished the last season of Orange is the New Black. I liked it a lot, so I thought, let's do something else in a similar vein.
Yeah, it's been getting a lot of good press. I always felt that it's one of those shows that it suffers by being overly compared to Orange is the New Black, in the sense of, oh, it's another female ensemble show on Netflix. But it sounds like they're striking quite a different tone, or at least a somewhat different tone.
Well, yeah, they're aware that, it's a wrestling show. It's set in the 80s, so there's, lots of garish costumes. They're sort of playing a bit into the sort of 80s sports movie vibe, actually. There's a lot of comedy training montages with people, training hard and then falling over. But I can appreciate that. Plus, the comedy beat of one of the sort of background cast of slightly older wrestlers chiming into all the dramatic moments to say something either inane or insane. Which I guess is a bit of an Orange is the New Black beat. But it's good here too.
Oh, excellent.
But yeah, I really do recommend it. It's very pleasant. I've watched a bit of heavy premium drama lately between The Leftovers and the aforementioned Orange is the New Black. Oh, it's not 100% fun and frolic, so I have just hit a slightly serious subplot in season 2. It's largely a bit more of a light, fun character comedy.
Do you know how well it's been received by wrestling fans?
I don't know how well it's been received from a historical, is this strictly accurate perspective. I know a few people who I follow on Twitter who like wrestling in addition to liking other things also seem to enjoy the show. So I guess it must not be completely uncredible as opposed to incredible. It seems to be received quite well by telly viewers anyway. They've got a season 3.
I know that friend of the podcast and former guest Chris Brosnahan, he's obviously a big wrestling fan, and he really liked the show.
I actually was wondering if he'd seen it. I couldn't actually remember off the top of my head, and it would have been a bit of a complicated Twitter search to do completely off the cuff on air. But yeah, I'm glad he liked it. He is the first person I thought of.
Excellent. I haven't actually watched this show, but it's one I've wanted to, but it's the classic thing that there's too much good Netflix and not enough time.
It's true, but there's only 2 seasons of 10 half-hour episodes each. I've very much powered through it in about the time it takes me to watch one season of most shows, so it's worth a go if you ever fancy a laugh.
I didn't realise they're only half an hour. I thought they would be more sort of Orange is the New Black kind of drama length episodes of sort of 45 minutes to an hour in length.
No, they're committing to the sort of in tune with the comedy thing. It's only about half an hour. But yeah, anyway, that's me. What about you?
I've been watching BBC's new spy thriller, which has been getting a bit of buzz, called Killing Eve.
Oh yeah.
I guess it's like a modern Spooks, but whereas, Spooks very much played up the slick kind of spyness of MI5. Killing Eve, they kind of generally very much go for the sort of theme of it's just like any other office. How the first episode begins with everyone coming in hungover because they were out for a colleague's birthday, singing karaoke the night before, and there's sort of arguments over pastries in the office, or some important scenes take place inside the kitchen, and obviously the MI5 kitchen looks just like any other kitchen, and people are sort of microwaving Tupperwares of lunch. So, I don't know, they're sort of leading on this MI5 is just like any normal place to work. But then there's a sort of explosive spy plot line kind of gets dropped in it about this assassin who's running around Europe picking off high-profile targets for reasons we're not entirely certain of, whether she's a paid assassin or he's got some kind of agenda. And I think they're maneuvering it towards the main MI5 operative is obviously trying to track down and uncover this assassin. But I do like the mundanity of it all. It makes some of the more sort of ridiculous or at least far-fetched or James Bond-esque spy moments of the assassinations seem much more believable when it's intercut with regular office scenes.
Yeah, no, I have seen a lot of bus ads and heard a lot of online buzz about Killing Eve. It was written by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, isn't it? Of Fleabag fame.
Yes, it is, as well. Which is, I think, another reason why, A, it's really good, and B, it's kind of nailed that studied everyday life thing that Fleabag had. You know, the sort of, it's very believably everyday life. But in Fleabag, although it's much more down-to-earth than Killing Eve, it's still a sort of heightened form of reality the characters live in. They kind of get involved in scrapes that most normal people don't get involved in. But the sort of deft eye through which she sort of observes normal human interactions in everyday life give it this feeling of authenticity. And they brought that to MI5 now and International Assassins for Killing Eve. So I think it really shows how talented Phoebe Waller-Bridge is.
That is, to be honest, the next thing I was going to watch, really. Once I've watched the 5 episodes of Glow I have left, I think Killing Eve was very much the next thing up. So I'm glad to hear it's good.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. It'd be interesting to see where they go. I think the whole thing has been uploaded sort of Netflix style to BBC iPlayer, but is also, I think, being shown week on television. But yeah, it seems like they've got an interesting arc that they've started on, so I hope they can continue to keep it interesting.
Yeah, it aired earlier in the year in America, and I saw a lot of podcasts getting quite hot about it then, so I've been looking forward to them finally putting it out in Britain. Okay, our main review item this fortnight then is the new movie The Predator, the 4th film in the Predator series, or possibly the 6th if you count the 2 Alien vs Predator movies. This, of course, is a franchise based around a ruthless alien hunter who, as far as I can see, bums around the universe hunting stuff for sport. And he's been around in films since the 80s, I think, when he first appeared facing off against Arnold Schwarzenegger. And now, like all franchises with some degree of following, he's back in a new movie written and directed by Shane Black, who we all quite liked when he did Iron Man 3. So yes, I, of course, have not seen any of these films, because that is my role. And it's much less time-consuming to just go with it rather than actually go and watch them. Whereas Alistair has seen all of them, including the Alien vs. ones. So, experts' verdicts first. Alistair, is it good?
Well, I thought it was good. A friend of mine who's a big fan of Predator films asked me to let him know after I'd seen it whether I liked it or not, and I really shy away from giving out stars or marks out of 10 or percentages, because I just think it's ridiculous to try and quantify what the difference between 3 and 4 stars are. So trying to describe it without using 3 or 4 stars as succinctly as possible, I think what I said to my friend was that it's just over the line that separates okay from good. So I guess it's in the good territory, but it's marginal. So that you wouldn't want to appeal the ref's decision because you might get downgraded on a recount. So yeah, that's a long way of saying I thought it was good. It had some good action scenes in it. You know, it was entertaining. I didn't feel bored. It did have not so much flaws. Well, it did have flaws, which I'm sure we'll come to. But the flaws weren't the main issue. I think it's more kind of what it didn't have than what was missing. So it didn't have the sense of humour that a lot of Shane Black's other films have, you know, Iron Man 3 being the obvious example. So yeah, it lacked the very much winning action plus banter, Joss Whedon-esque tone that a lot of films, you know, from Marvel to Fast and the Furious sort of aim for. It didn't really achieve that. It wasn't particularly tense or scary at times, but it did have some good action scenes and some nice sci-fi bits. So yeah, I'd say good with needed qualification.
I'd say sort of kind of okay, I suppose. I felt like it needed to go up a few rungs before I'd start throwing around aggressively passionate terms like good. I felt like it sort of sat there on the screen in a slightly annoying way. I didn't really feel like it ever quite peaked or troughed in the way that I like, you know, stories to, at least to some extent, do. I never really felt that tense or that sad or that anything. There were a couple of mildly amusing jokes. There's one quite good bit with a kid wearing a Predator mask as a Halloween costume, which is quite a funny joke, which I'm not going to spoil here. I hear rumours there was some trouble production type shit going on with this, a bit of recutting and stuff, so it's possible that they've just, I don't know, they just haven't been able to put together a film that actually has the full range of human emotion when cutting it together from bits. But I felt like it just ran through a lot of stuff in a way that felt a bit rushed and never really let me get into the beats that much. There's a lot that happens in this film, considering it's only about 95 minutes long. It's quite short, as modern films go. You know, if they were just making a sort of a fairly straightforward soldiers hunted by Predator action film, then to be honest, that would be quite a good length for it. But because about 20 things happen in this film, and it goes through a variety of different settings and quite a lot of characters, it feels quite crammed in, and maybe that's why I came away thinking that not that much stuff gets room to breathe. And again, one has to assume that maybe the rumours about it being quite heavily cut and the fact that it feels very rushed and like slashed down probably isn't a coincidence to me. Yeah, I felt I never really fully clicked into the characters or the plots, which, although there was the occasional good comedy bit or fun action bit, was a bit of a deal breaker for me from saying this was particularly good.
Yeah, I mean, it did seem to be like edited together slightly oddly in that the pacing was a bit off, that they had a lot to get through, and sometimes the plot would move very quickly and then sometimes it would move quite slowly. I assume that they didn't, though, in terms of recutting it, they didn't cut like lots and lots of good jokes and, you know, lots of, say, character development or emotional scenes, because that's what the film really lacked. I mean, the main characters were pretty flat. There's a generic hero who wants to save his son. He's a very generic soldier hero. You know, he's got some buddies who have maybe a little bit more personality than he does, in that they're a group of soldiers who have mental health problems, and they have a little bit more personality, but not really a lot.
Well, yeah, the main character's the one who actually gets an arc, but the others, they have no actual storyline, but they do at least have little personality quirks. There was a remark in Mark Commode's review of this, where he said in the final sequence he realised there was meant to have been some sort of bromance storyline between two characters, but he hadn't even realised it was happening because it had so little screen time. Yeah. And he's kind of right, to be honest. I sort of keyed into that storyline, but I don't think to the degree that the plot needed me to.
No, exactly. Because the characters weren't given much time to develop, or really much screen time at all, that couldn't be given over to, you know, people fighting predators of various different types. And I don't know, they had Olivia Munn, who I feel sorry for, in that she seems to have rotten luck in choosing film projects after, I believe, passing on Deadpool and then ending up in X-Men Apocalypse. And now this. I guess she's a very good actress, and I think she'd be good in the right sort of mainstream film vehicle. But it goes for, like, you know, parts of big franchises, which makes sense, but always seems to have bad luck with the parts or the film. But yeah, her character in this was, again, very light on personality or character arc.
It was a bit of a thin, badass female character, yeah. One of her only big pivotal scenes was unfortunately one that required her to get naked for almost no reason, which just sticks with you for the wrong reasons, to be honest.
Yeah. And then other than that, there was a generic ex-wife. There was a villain who had a little bit more personality because the guy was playing a sort of insidious villain. So again, that character had a little bit more personality quirks, but didn't have an arc or particularly strong relationship with any of the other characters. And I guess there was a kid who was, you know, a kid. I often find that kids in films a lot of the time don't really work, apart from in kids' films, because, I don't know, there's something about this kid that he just seems very much there to wander around and get threatened by a predator to give the dad something to do. Again, the kid didn't have a lot of personality either. He just was pretty much like a walking MacGuffin that would just wander towards the nasty alien with all the spiky blades.
I fully agree, but I thought you said you thought it was good.
Well, I'm saying one of my flaws with the film, what was lacking was any sense of character development or character arc. I mean, what made it good, I guess, or at least firmly in the okay area, was that the action scenes were good. There were lots of spectacular fight scenes. It was well paced in terms of, like, it wasn't too long, and the action moved along at a decent heft. There were some good sci-fi fights, basically, which is, I guess, what you want from your popcorn summer blockbuster, or late summer blockbuster as we are at now.
I thought it was a bit weirdly paced, to be honest. But I do agree that the action bits, when they happened, did land quite nicely. Although that bit in the forest at the end was weirdly dark. But aside from that, yeah, the action bits that were there were pretty good. There was a fun bit with the Predator slaughtering a load of people in a base, apart from the fact that that's when the aforementioned slightly needless Olivia Munn takes her clothes off scene was. The rest of that scene was pretty good. And there were occasional hints that they were going to do some sort of vaguely deconstructive Joss Whedon-y banter stuff. There was occasional hints that they were going for more of a, like, really high-octane, like, full-on trashy 90s action film. And there's a bit at the end where they seem to be doing sort of one Predator picking people off horror. I kind of wish they'd just picked a tone and stuck to it, to be honest. Because, especially considering, as I said, it's quite a short film, trying to do a microcosm of every possible Predator film in like 95 minutes felt a bit strange.
I guess that's one of the main issues with this film, is that it doesn't really know kind of what it wants to be. They've definitely aimed it at a more mainstream action sort of audience and tone than previous Predator films, in that with previous films, they were trying to be, I don't know, maybe darker or a bit scarier, such as the first film, the soldiers in the jungle slowly being picked off one by one. The reveal of the Predator is done quite slowly over time. They discover various skinned former victims of the Predator on the way that amps up the tension. I mean, the original Predator was in some ways not aspiring to particularly much. It was, I think, supposed to be very much a B action movie. The fact that it managed to strike a chord by having, a particularly memorable villain is probably why there's been so many follow-on films and comics and games. But they dn't go over the tone of the original, and then they sort of wanted, I guess, to make this more of just a straight-up action movie. But again, they didn't really settle on the tone of that, in that they wanted to get some of the tone of the original, plus a straight-up action movie that took itself seriously, but then also, plus they wanted to go for the modern combination of Joss Whedon's humour and action. So being tonally all over the place certainly didn't help the film.
I don't know if they really tried to go for that, to be honest. I mean, it might be what I was sort of half expecting, but I don't think there weren't that many jokes in this film. The ones that were there weren't really very quippy, self-aware banter. They were mostly sort of soldier jokes, where the main joke is that they said an offensive word.
Yeah.
Don't know if they really went that far in that direction.
No, but I think what they probably aspired to on some level. I mean, I don't know why you'd hire Shane Black as a director, who's known for that kind of sort of slightly more comedic tone, and not want him to make a film of a slightly more comedic tone. I mean, I don't know if this film had an issue of being designed by committee too much.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of the reasons I thought this might be fun, and one of the reasons why I'm somewhat genuinely disappointed, I don't seem to like it very much, is that, I saw Shane Black taking on a major franchise in, as I said, Iron Man 3, and that was pretty good. Yeah, in fact, that was very good. So, it's disappointing, but on this occasion, and obviously it's easy to blame the execs or the bureaucrats or whatever, and considering there was a lot of reshoots, maybe Shane Black did turn in something quirkier and more daring, or something that just didn't work at all, one or the other, and it was then recut with a slightly weird flat ending. We may never know. But it's hard to tell, to be honest. I mean, even with a different ending or something, it would still have been a slightly weird film for the rest of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of lack of success of this film has probably mean there won't be many sequels or any sequels, so it's possible we won't get, Shane Black to have a second crack at it. It's also interesting that Shane Black was in the original Predator, back when in the 80s he was an actor, playing Hawkins. I think he was one of the first people to be the victim of the Predator. Maybe he took this on because it was a passion project for him, or did the people making the film thought he had some kind of mystical connection to the formula that made the original one a success. I mean, personally, I'd much more prefer this film if they tried to ape the original one more closely rather than doing something new. I mean, the film starts with a Predator ship crashing in a jungle stroke forest with some soldiers, and I thought, they're going to go for a fairly straight up, much closer to a remake than a sequel. But then obviously it quite quickly moves the action to, an army base, then an urban environment, then back to a forest again.
Yeah.
Which is again one of the problems of the film. It doesn't settle on one thing, but I'd prefer them to stuck with something closer to the original, just soldiers fighting the Predator in the forest, because, like I say, the original Predator didn't aspire to be, a classic or a great work of suspense or tension, but it did have this brilliantly, elegantly simple premise that worked so well. There's some commando soldiers that are on a difficult mission that they succeed in completing with relative ease, and then they meet something even sort of nastier and more cunning than them in the depth of the jungle. Yeah, and then action and sort of horror follows. And it's such a brilliantly simple premise that I think that's why it's sort of lodged in people's imaginations, and why people wanted sequels, and why people have liked the character of the Predator so much to make video games and comics about it. But this film, I felt, really overcomplicated what was needed from a Predator film, and that is one of its sort of greater flaws.
I didn't get the feeling there was a huge amount of, thing going over my head, or, I didn't get the feeling that if I knew the Predator mythology, I would have got that much more from it. There's one bit which I didn't really get, which I've since had explained to me by the internet, where apparently the reason Olivia Munn had to get naked so the Predator wouldn't kill her is because he doesn't kill you if you're unarmed. And of course, who is less armed than a naked person, I guess. But even that's, I don't know. That hasn't saved the film or that scene for me, to be honest. And aside from that, to give it its credit, I suppose, it was quite accessible. But yeah, I mean, like you kind of said, I was sort of expecting a bit more sort of lone Predator versus some soldiers or something. Especially, I don't know, the title made me expect that for some reason. I was like, The Predator. Okay, it's going to be, stripped down, one Predator, straightforward. But that didn't really happen.
The other thing I sort of didn't like about this film is that, I'm sort of talking myself around to not liking it more. Although I didn't feel particularly disappointed in the cinema, so I don't know if it's one of those things that just... there's those films when, like, a few weeks later, you kind of think about it like, God, that film was really good, but really good in, like, a subtle way.
Then you have to talk to me about it. It just goes downhill from there.
Yeah, but maybe this is one of those films that you realise is really bad in a subtle way.
I just came out of the cinema with a sort of gripped by a sort of shrugging indifference. And when you sort of start on a shrugging indifference straight after seeing it, when you're meant to be on some sort of high, by a day or two later I realised that actually, to be honest, not only did I not care, it wasn't really that great.
Maybe I'm coloured too much by liking the originals. Then again, this film really, like I say, it really lacked what the originals had. And I also felt one of the problems with it as well, which is something that the original so definitely avoided, is that it just had way too much Predator lore in it, in the sense of like they're kind of adding more and more to the Predator universe. And obviously they're onto their sixth film or whatever. The plot has grown in complexity to a degree. They go back to the thing from Predators, where there's two different types of predators fighting each other in this film as well as fighting the people, which is interesting. But I don't know, there are various things like in terms of human beings being able to use the Predator tech, or at some points like read their language, or indeed the Predators being able to read our language. And I felt that like this was really a kind of a science fiction short change, so to speak. One of the great things about the original Predator is that the Predator comes across as very alien. We can't really communicate with it. It can sort of record sounds and plays them back, but you don't really get a sense it understands what it's doing. There's a bit when it sort of laughs maniacally, and it may be worked out what that is for people, but you get a sense it doesn't really understand people. It understands kind of hunting and killing and understands how to kill us, but it doesn't really understand our culture, what we are. There's no sense does the Predator even see us as different from an animal, apart from the first film right at the end when it takes off its armour to fight Arnie fist to fist, because at that point it has some kind of respect and acknowledgement because Arnie's been able to fight it effectively. But it really did illustrate the kind of what would be the enormous gap between humans and aliens that would be very, very difficult to bridge and probably would lead to violence. And the Predator is like that. I mean, it can't be reasoned with or discussed, or you can't beg. It doesn't really understand, it just kills. And when it gets to the point in this, when people are sort of communicating with predators in various ways or reading their language, or the predator talking to us, I felt that this was kind of shortchanging the decent science fiction of the original Predator to make the film work. And obviously the film wasn't very good. So
yeah, maybe that was one of the parts where it lost me a bit. In pretending it doesn't seem to work for you that well either. I just sort of sat there thinking, I have no emotion about the Predator, and therefore I don't care. And you sat there thinking, well, this isn't what I want from the Predator, so I don't like it. So it's a lose-lose, really.
I mean, I don't know if there are serious fans out there. I mean, maybe there are who really want to learn more about the Predator universe and dive into it more.
Past experience dictates no. No one seems happy about knowing more about the aliens, courtesy of the Covenant film.
Now, that's another prime example of that. Again, what works so well is the alienness of the alien. The more intelligible you make them, the more you take what was quite a nasty and good sort of villainous character and slowly turn them into E.T. It was only a matter of time before we have a friendly Predator.
Yeah, a plot twist that kind of barely worked, but anyway, never mind.
Yeah, this didn't really stay true to the spirit of the original, but it didn't seem to do anything interesting with this new version. It sort of decided, well, we had this quite good suspense film, so generic action movie? It's like, okay, well, I don't know, maybe. Let's break for lunch.
Yeah, I was hungry anyway. Okay, our follow-up question then after watching The Predator. After a bit of discussion about, me having not seen it and Alistair having seen it, and the general way that so many films nowadays are follow-ups to previous films, either from last year or last decade, or the decade before last in this case. We ask, does it really matter if you haven't seen the previous films? Obviously, we're not just talking about Predator here, but yes, Alistair, does it, or maybe more applicably as a question, should it really matter if you haven't seen the previous films?
Well, I think it shouldn't, and certainly in this case, it doesn't. If anyone's hovering on the fence and would like to see the film, despite our last review, but is worried they're going to find it too confusing or they're not familiar enough with previous Predator films, you don't need to know really anything about the Predator to enjoy this film. And really it shouldn't. A film should be accessible to a new audience. I think usually you'd have to work a bit harder, especially if you're coming into a direct sequel, which should be slightly less accessible. I mean, you have to be aware that you're watching a part 2 of something you've not seen in part 1, so you need to keep your eye open for the bits where the director or the writer has put in the key bits of information you need to pick up from the first film. So it is something harder, maybe, but it should be eminently possible, and directors or screenwriters should go out of their way to make sure there is enough information in there so that someone can kind of pick it up and go with it.
I think it seems weirdly obvious to me sitting out here that, you just want to make something that for the most part you just try and get the basic idea across and then go with it. Part of me doesn't quite understand why you make films like this, which seem completely unsure who they're really aimed at. I mean, the recent Ghostbusters reboot wasn't a perfect film, but it still managed to be entertaining because it did mostly focus on just doing a story rather than wanking off the existing fans. And even though parts of that film may not have landed, I'll have still taken it over things like this and, I don't know, Independence Day Resurgence or the Alien Covenant films we mentioned. And it's weird how with these new reboots of dormant franchises, they seem to be the ones where creators get it more badly wrong. Or at least, I don't know, maybe it's just that they think they can do what the Marvel films do and make some sort of deep lore thing and everyone will get it. But they don't realise that the reason the Marvel films get away with that to a degree is because the last one came out last year rather than last decade, and people outside the hardcore fan base won't have a clue what you're on about. And a lot of Marvel films, certainly maybe outside the really hardcore ones like Infinity War, you can probably absorb most of the relevant information just through general cultural osmosis, like to a quite high degree, whereas I just turned up knowing roughly what a Predator is.
Yeah, I think cultural osmosis is a big factor here. I'm not sure if that's even a phrase or if I coined it, but the general idea that probably most people know who Batman is. Some people have never even seen a Batman film or read a Batman comic, but everyone knows who Batman is. And I guess now films that are based so much on these well-known characters like Batman, Superman or Wolverine, there's absolutely no need for you to be aware of the previous installments. And in some cases, the takes are radically different. They might be darker, or they might be, more like a crime film or more like a science fiction film. So I think, and a lot of filmmakers are aware that, especially if you're making a series of films or even something much more ambitious like a big cinematic shared universe, that people won't. There'll be some people, obviously, who, like us, who religiously watch every film in the sequence. But some people will just come at the ones that take their fancy or ones that get enough buzz. So they need to make sure that people can just pick up the plot and sort of slide into it. For example, I know people who went to see Thor Ragnarok without having seen Doctor Strange. And even despite the fact there's a sort of extended Doctor Strange cameo at the beginning of the film, if you've just seen a poster for Doctor Strange, or certainly the trailer for the film, you get the deal with the character. And even if you hadn't seen that much, it's established quite quickly in the film. So, those films are very good at making, Marvel, I think, especially really excel at making it so you don't have to have seen the previous films, because they know that's an obstacle they have to work against.
With these sort of dormant franchises like Predator and Terminator or whatever, part of me doesn't get why they insist on continuing to, continue them. Why does it always have to be a continuation? I mean, even, the slow-moving steam train of, like, Spider-Man and Batman have normally seem to realise that after a while you could just reboot the thing and just come back in with the core premise, and if anything, people will go for that more.
Yeah.
Whereas apparently no Terminator film is completely without trying to make it somehow link back into the, at this point, incomprehensible timeline bullshit that goes over the previous 6 films.
Well, Terminator have made their life so much harder for themselves by bringing in time travel and rewriting their own history, which just makes things much more complicated. But you're right. I mean, I would have much preferred The Predator to have been pretty much a straight-up remake of Predator. Soldiers in the jungle fighting the Predator. If they just sort of wipe the slate clean, like we're going to forget all that AVP bollocks. The Arnie film, the Danny Glover sequel, they were good, but, we're going to wipe the slate clean and reset it just like, Batman or Spider-Man does. And I think that would have been a better film, rather than struggling to kind of fold this into the plot of the previous ones. I mean, Predators is better at this. I mean, Predators aims, I think, more as being a B movie aimed more at the fans than The Predator, which is clearly aiming for a more mainstream audience. But, it's just some soldiers get abducted, taken to a predator planet and have to fight predators. Yeah. It kind of works in its own little bubble because it's not on Earth and it's just soldiers fighting predators. It can be a sequel or it could not. It's just, it kind of exists in and of itself. You certainly don't need to know anything about the previous Predators to get the dynamic. It's a fairly simple dynamic. So that would work much better, as you said, for these dormant franchise. I don't know if people feel that this is what the fans want. They always want it to be a continuation of the story, not a reset. But, I mean, is that what fans want, or is it what people think fans want, and actually fans want something else?
Well, as people have said before me, should you give fans what they think they want or what they don't yet know they want or something? I mean, or should you even care what the fans want? I mean, for these things to actually really succeed, I feel like you need to get at least a degree of the, if not the general public, then at least the general regular cinema going, I just like a good horror film nerd in. If it's just Predator fans, you're going to dry up quite quickly, I think. And therefore, I feel like you have to sort of assume you can drastically underestimate how much the average person who isn't necessarily a big Predator fan but just goes to the cinema a lot gives a shit about the true purpose of the Predators or why they've been coming to the planet all these years, especially when it's, I'm not going to spoil it, because what's the point? But especially when it has very little relevance to the actual plot in the end. I don't know whether that's because of the V-shot ending or whatever, but yeah, there was some weird, pointless retcon shit in this film. And I say this as someone who doesn't see the things they're retconning. Yeah, I don't really watch long-running horror franchises, because I'm not a huge horror person, but they seem to do okay out of just making film after punishing film of here's a few more people getting killed off by the same person or thing. They know what side the bread's busted on.
I don't know if that's a thing specific to the horror genre, in that horror fans, a lot of them want to see the same dynamic again. I think there's certainly an element of, with horror films, it's usually to a degree of ever-decreasing returns. I saw the first 2 Paranormal Activity films because they had a buzz around of being generally quite scary. I thought the first one was quite tense, and generally on the whole, scary enough to be good. The second one I thought was a disappointment. And after that, I really didn't stick with them because I thought I don't want to see the inevitable process of ever diminishing returns by repeating the same format. I think there is that element with horror films that they make one that's a hit, it breaks through to mainstream audiences, and then they make sequels just for the fans, and then increasingly reach one even more hardcore fans, distilling it more and more and more to the point where it doesn't become profitable. Like, imagine a similar thing happened to a franchise like Saw or Scream or Friday the 13th or any of them, Hellraiser. I guess they just continue this process of refining and narrowing down their audience. I assume something like The Predator that must have been quite expensive to make. They feel that it needs to reach out to a mainstream audience, so they can't just kind of double down on what the fans want. But then again, we just said the problem seems to be what the fans want, or what people think the fans want, is a continuous story, and that's one of the things that's really holding these films back.
I mean, although we can talk till we die, and so far it seems like we're going to, about how you could make franchises go on forever. It's possible they just shouldn't. It's possible it shouldn't matter if you haven't seen the previous films, because you shouldn't keep bolting films onto things.
They should draw a line after something.
Well, yeah, something like that. I don't know. I mean, I must admit, when I very first heard they were making a new Predator film, though I like Shane Black fine because of Iron Man 3 again, my first reaction was sort of, yeah, of course they are. Why not? It's one of the few franchises that's even vaguely well remembered that hasn't been done yet. Drag the body out, shake it around. Why not? And it doesn't help in a broader context, maybe in an entirely different cinematic landscape, this would have been seen like an interesting new thing to do. But unfortunately, dredging up the corpse of something we haven't done a sequel to for a while, and then waving it around a bit, has become such a routine event. But I think we're all a bit cynical, as I'm certainly advertising.
Yeah, that is very much the case. If we hadn't seen it done before, we'd be more enthusiastic about it.
I mean, we're not in the peak of that. I seem to recall that roughly the year we started this podcast in, the sunny, distant world of 2016, where everything was momentarily better before it got much worse. Yeah, that seemed to be a bit of a high point of cinematic, oh god, what can we shit out a sequel to? That was, of course, the year we did Independence Day Resurgence, which was probably the nadir of that particular trend that year.
Yeah, that was a sequel too far, certainly.
Certainly one of them, yeah.
I think the salient point in all of this is one we've already covered, which is that superhero films have remained consistently popular, and even the same few core superhero franchises remain consistently popular, not only for the 20 years or so since the kind of, this current superhero explosion, but even going back into, the sort of the 70s and 80s, because they refresh the franchises every so often. Even something like X-Men, they feel the need to make it about them when they were young, or about a spin-off character, or just, let's just have Wolverine. They kind of feel the need to make it fresh each time. And X-Men Apocalypse has introduced us to, fresh new characters who are going to get a film and so on. So I think the longevity of superheroes is to do with the fact that people don't mind the resets every so often, and maybe they'll breathe some life into some of these other franchises that are just basically, like you say, been having their bodies taken out and flogged for cash every so often.
Well, yeah, whoever is in control of the Disney money machine has cleverly realised that after 3 films of a single property, they can afford to vest it for a bit. They seem to still have Robert Downey Jr. on the books. I'm sure they could have chucked money at him until he did an Iron Man 4, but somewhat reasonably they haven't.
No.
As someone who is broadly pro Marvel Cinematic Universe, I'm aware that there's probably some who feel the vicious sting of my hypocrisy as I say things like films should be accessible, or there's such a thing as too many sequels. But the problem with bringing out sequels to things from ages ago and treating it like it's part of an ongoing cinematic universe, it just kind of misses the context of what you're doing.
Yeah, very much so.
And unfortunately, every year that goes by since the last one, the sense of slight shrugging pointlessness when you just plop out the next one increases. So
yeah, and I think there are some films you can sort of drop into the middle. I mean, I'm trying to think of some sort of interesting examples of times when people have tried to pick up sort of film franchises in the middle. For example, Mad Max. I think the original Mad Max Road Warrior is actually not particularly well known. Most people started with the second film, I think, was the one that broke through to be successful. So, well, obviously the Mad Max isn't a particularly complex franchise, but yeah, there's an element of like sometimes a film starts as a B movie or a film like a non-Hollywood film and then becomes a mainstream film. Most people pick up the franchise with like the second or third film, and sometimes people are none the wiser. An obvious example that reminded me of this is way back in 2003 when I was just starting at university. There was a big buzz amongst sort of cinephiles about the Korean film Old Boy. There's a Spike Jonze remake, I believe. Anyway, this film got quite a lot of buzz because it's good. It's a very good film, and it's very dark and violent. It famously includes a scene when the main actor eats a live octopus, and the actor actually did eat a live octopus, and it is as grotesque as you're imagining it right now, if not more so.
I have actually seen that film.
You have seen that film?
I have.
Oh, well, anyway, you can testify to how disgusting that bit was. But Old Boy is actually the second in the Vengeance trilogy. It's a sequel to Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. And I think most people, myself included, were just dropped into the middle because not being particularly close observers of South Korean cinema meant that the first one had passed us by, but the second one did manage to break through to get a mainstream audience, release a mainstream international art house audience. And obviously, yeah, some people found that film quite confusing because its plot is quite heavily based on following up from the first film. But there was an element you could enjoy Old Boy without seeing Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, and most of the world's cinephiles who went to see it were able to pick up the plot, and that's a more sort of plot-heavy film. So, you know, if you're willing to do the effort and try and pick up the clues that you're sent by the director over what you need to know from the previous film, or if you're willing to, as I did, just kind of charge in headlong and not even be aware that the film you're watching is actually a sequel to a film you've not seen, you can still enjoy the film and find it accessible.
Well, yeah, and also to pick up on something you mentioned a few minutes ago, Mad Max. Obviously, Mad Max Fury Road is a rare example of a film franchise from ages ago being picked back up and spat back out as a new film, and it actually working out pretty well for everyone involved.
Yeah, that's a good example.
And yeah, I've just said that most of the time when you do that, it doesn't work, but obviously, you know, it can work, just that most people don't seem to put in the work.
Well, similar to Predators, the thing is Mad Max Fury Road in many ways could be like a separate film that exists entirely separately, or a direct sequel. I think partly because the nature of the character of Max is that the character encounters an event, gets brought up into it and moves on. The nature of the character is he always keeps moving on and he never goes back really to what he's experienced before. So you could interpret it as, you know, Mad Max Fury Road is the one and only adventure of the character Mad Max, played by Tom Hardy, and then there's a separate universe in which a different Mad Max exists, played by Mel Gibson. And you could interpret it that way because of the way the film is done. It can stand by itself, or you could view it as this is the same character, and this is the next adventure in his life of continually moving through this post-apocalyptic world. They did a good job of making you be able to have your cake and eat it in that regard, which is, I think, what allowed it to be both a sequel and a standalone film, whereas The Predator is, in the same ways, it's neither, but in the worst possible way. It's kind of its own thing, but also a sequel to what came before, and it doesn't really work well as either.
Yeah, The Predator is definitely no Mad Max Fury Road. It's just not cool enough in its own right. Obviously, I saw Mad Max Fury Road, having not seen any previous Mad Max films. I liked it fine. Mad Max was barely even a presence. It was cool.
Yeah, just checking my things, I noticed I made several mistakes of what I've said so far. Mad Max Road Warrior is the second one. It was Mad Max, then Mad Max Road Warrior, then Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. So yeah, a lot of people just picked up the franchise with Mad Max Road Warrior without really being aware probably that was a Mad Max. But again, like I say, you can just watch them. Each one works quite well as a standalone thing, which is what's given that franchise longevity. The other mistake I made is that I believe I said that the remake of Old Boy in 2013 was by Spike Jonze. It was by Spike Lee. I got my spikes mixed up. Feel free to leave that in or not.
There we go. Unlike most media, we actually correct our errors on the occasion when we notice them in time to correct them literally mid-recording. If we'd noticed them a few days later, I'd have either just cut them out or we just wouldn't have done anything.
That's all we have time for today. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. While you're there, please leave us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find this episode, past episodes, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you like, you could also follow us on Facebook or indeed Twitter, where I believe if you search for Moderate Fantasy Violence, you should be able to find our exciting purple logo and get occasional updates about the show and our lives and our opinions on pop culture, but mostly the show. I've been Nick Bryan. You can find more about me at nickbryan.com, or you can follow me on Twitter as @nickmb, where you can see, at the moment, mostly news about my slowly gestating comic career, including an actual comic I'm hoping to release in time for Halloween, so there really ought to be some solid news about that soon. We'll see how it goes.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlistairJRBall, and find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Thanks for listening. In the next episode, we will be reviewing Killing Eve, which we discussed at the top of this episode. But tune in next time for more detailed thoughts about the whole show, not just the first episode. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and join us again soon. Bye.
Bye. Right, okay, so I'm now introducing the Predator.
You are, yes. Introduce the Predator to everyone.
And now, for his after-dinner speech, it's the Predator. So, Mr. Predator, are you still killing people for sport? Oh, shit.